The National Football League has settled collusion lawsuits with ex-quarterback Colin Kaepernick and Carolina Panther Eric Reid. That's according to their attorney. Kaepernick sued the NFL, accusing the league and team owners of conspiring to keep him from playing over his choice to kneel during the national anthem before games. Kaepernick hasn't played since 2016. Eric Reid joined Carolina during the 2018 season. The terms of the financial settlement have not been released due to a non-disclosure agreement.
Without question, Colin Kaepernick is one of the most magnetic and polarizing figures around the NFL, and he isn't even associated with the league anymore. Earlier this week, the two parties settled Kaepernick's grievance against the NFL over collusion alongside Carolina safety Eric Reid. Now, as the league prepares to turn the page from this never-ending saga, the question is, how much progress have they made over social justice issues, and how far do they still need to go? That's where I began my discussion with Jeff Smith, senior sports analyst for Heavy.com, who joined me over the weekend to tackle a whole gamut of NFL hot topics. Okay, so first of all, Jeff, we want to take a few minutes and welcome you to the Two-Man Advantage podcast, and we're excited to talk some NFL headlines with you this afternoon.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks so much. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, honestly, how that all played out is kind of a little, I guess, somewhat concerning. I mean, it makes me kind of just think the NFL was basically just trying to kind of end this, which is understandable, of course, but I don't think it's going to help all that much in terms of allowing Kaepernick to get back into the league. Granted, I do believe that he should be playing somewhere. He's better than most backup quarterbacks. I know people tend to say the opposite, and they want to argue the opposite way, but you've seen some of these backup quarterbacks have to come into action. If you can tell me honestly that some of these guys are better than Colin Kaepernick, then I would need lots of visual proof, because I don't believe it. I hope he gets back in there, but I don't know if it's going to be possible. I don't know if a team will be able to, or would be willing to take that jump at this point. I don't know if they would do so, honestly.
Do you believe Kaepernick will ever play again? And how do you believe people should view owners' perception of this entire situation?
I mean, based on a pure talent level, I think that he should have an opportunity, but obviously we haven't seen much come of that as of late, and he hasn't drawn much attention, which is unfortunate. I do think that he's a player who can compete and play at a high level still. I don't know if he'll be a starter. I don't think he'll be a starter at the NFL level, but I think he'd be a solid backup quarterback, and I think that he should have that opportunity, deserves to have that opportunity, and whether or not that pans out is going to be the big question, but I would have a hard time envisioning someone deciding to take that lead. Maybe like the Panthers potentially could do so. That could be an option. It's a very interesting situation. Obviously, they signed Eric Reid last year, and Cam Newton with the shoulder issue. That could be something to watch. But I think there's probably a very short list of teams who would probably consider it. I mean, I think it's kind of one of those things where I almost feel like some people don't know how to approach it. They don't know what to do and what to think, and kind of the best route to go about it at all. I mean, you run into those situations where you see certain teams and certain players, sound off on it or say, we don't want people kneeling, we don't want people doing this, we don't want people doing that. And I think it's more of a situation where they don't know what the best way to handle that is. It's a very tough situation, because there's a lot of very strong supporters, and of course there's people who don't back it at all. And obviously everyone has their own right to do whatever they want to do. And I think the owners and probably coaches and some of the other players even are probably having a tough time with the best route to go about it, themselves, and how to approach it. So I think it's very tough for them. I think it's a tough situation for them. And obviously I don't feel bad to the point that they have to figure this stuff out, but it's definitely a tough situation to navigate, I would assume.
And when we transition into looking into the signing of Kareem Hunt, obviously he had a previous relationship with John Dorsey, who used to be the general manager of Kansas City, who is now in Cleveland. So I'm just wondering your initial thoughts when you saw that, and whether you think it's worth the risk for the Browns to make such a move.
Yeah. So the thing is with Kareem Hunt, he was going to get signed. Like I don't think there was any question he was going to get signed, and there was going to be backlash for it. But obviously, the biggest backlash that's going to come for this is going to fall on Kareem Hunt. I know that the Browns are going to take the hit for it, and they're going to look, people are going to talk about them in a negative light for a while, and that's understandable. But, you got to look back at other situations. I mean, the Cowboys signed Greg Hardy after a terrible situation. There was a lot of very, very bad situations and very tough situations that have, led to teams having to make hard decisions. And with Hunt, I mean, there is no, what he did was wrong entirely. There's not a question about that. He's trying to take the steps towards at least putting himself in a position where, he can better himself. Regardless, though, someone was going to take a chance on him, and the Browns just decided to do it. And John Dorsey is one of those guys who, like you said, I mean, he knows Hunt, and if anyone knows Kareem Hunt, it's John Dorsey, and I'm not super surprised by the signing. And as far as like a pure football fit, I understand there was some kickback on that because of Nick Chubb and, because of Duke Johnson and stuff. But obviously I think Duke Johnson, very well maybe kind of on his way, it won't return to the Browns potentially. But, the Nick Chubb stuff is, he's a rookie running back. And that's not to say he's not going to be a great player in the NFL. He very well could be. But, we've seen tons of rookie running backs flame out in year 2 or year 3 or whatever the case may be. So, I mean, Dorsey was basically saying, I'm going to take this talented player, yes, who has a lot of baggage off the field right now, and we're gonna pair him with Nick Chubb and see what can happen. I mean, again, you don't know what's going to happen with Nick Chubb. That's purely from a football standpoint, of course.
And when we look at Kyler Murray making the decision to focus on football over baseball, I'm just wondering your thoughts on that decision itself and whether you think he made the right one choosing football over baseball.
Yeah, so the thing is, obviously one big topic around him has been, the question of his height and, things along those lines. And I get that. I understand that, height is somewhat important, but you also have to consider the fact that, there are shorter quarterbacks in the NFL now who have had success. I mean, Drew Brees kind of started that trend, right? I mean, he's barely 6 feet tall, I guess, or maybe 6'1", something like that. But the height thing is one issue, but Kyler Murray, it's not like he's been this height throughout college. He was this height all year with Oklahoma. I mean, what his talent level is. The thing that I would say about Kyler Murray most impressively is that he decided to take the leap to the NFL because he loves the game of football. He wanted to play football over baseball. That's not to say he doesn't love baseball, and that's not to say that he couldn't be a great baseball player, which he probably could. But he just loved the game of football and decided he wanted to do that. And I give a lot of credit to people who do that. Obviously his agent, Scott Boras, was saying, this isn't the plan, this isn't what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. But Kyler Murray basically said, listen, this is my life, this is my decision, and I'm not going to go into this and come out regretting it because I didn't try to play football. It's what he loves to do, so I give him credit for that. I think that's a tough decision to make, and he navigated it. So.
And when we look at overall NFL headlines, what's the one headline that no one's talking about right now that could have a major effect over the offseason, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the Oakland Raiders are going to be an interesting topic for a few reasons. Largely because of the fact that we know John Gruden does not have an issue, creating headlines, making headlines, creating waves, changing things up. I mean, he was probably the most active person I've ever seen during an off season, like preparing a team, just flipping people in and out of the roster and, making trades. And he was super active. And I think what it really comes down to is that the Raiders, I don't think Gruden wants to, and no one wants to go through a year of what they went through, but they also have the relocation stuff going on. I wouldn't be surprised if Gruden pulls something very, very big on draft night or before the draft or makes a huge change. They've obviously been talked about as like a Kyler Murray fit, of course, but, Derek Carr is a good quarterback, but if the opportunity presents itself and, say he gets the chance to draft Kyler Murray and trade Derek Carr for a lucrative offer, I mean, I don't know what he would do. I have no idea. This is total speculation, of course, but I'd be interested. I think the Raiders are going to be a talking point, and I wouldn't be surprised if they make some big moves, including possibly adding Antonio Brown. Who knows?
Since you brought the topic of Brown's future to the table, how do you believe that situation will reach its conclusion?
Yeah, I think he'll get traded. I don't know where it'll be to. Obviously, there's been rumblings that that the Steelers don't want to trade him in the division, and they don't want to move him to the Patriots. I don't think anyone has any interest in adding talent to the Patriots at this point. And the thing is that there are going to be better packages for Brown than what the Patriots can offer. So, I don't know if there'll be like a massive number of offers for what they probably want. But I do think he'll get moved. And, of course, the 49ers have been linked for some time now. The Raiders, like I said, are an interesting fit. I think that they'll probably try to send him to a team who was, at the bottom of the standings this past year, and who they don't have to see much of. I don't think they want to see Antonio Brown. So I think that'll all factor in, but I do think they'll eventually wind up trading him. I mean, I just don't see any way they don't at this point.
And just circling back to the Raiders for a minute, I know you said Derek Carr is a good quarterback, but do you think he's the long-term answer for the Raiders at quarterback?
So, that's a good question. That's a great question. That's a tough call because of the fact that I do think that he and John Gruden have the potential to really do something, put something good together on paper and really impress. But, on the field, sorry. But the big question is going to come down to just how they're able to mesh and what kind of coach John Gruden is able to be. Obviously people expected him to come in and just be this, huge offensive juggernaut, and they weren't. They just weren't that. So if he can turn the corner, Derek Carr is going to be a big part of that. And if Derek Carr does help them turn the corner, then I do believe that they'll do something special. But I don't blame last season on Derek Carr. I don't think that had anything really to do with that. He made some bad plays. He got in his head a little bit sometimes, but I think that Derek Carr is a good player, and if they do trade him, then whoever they trade him to would be picking up a very good quarterback with a lot of upside.
Do you think the relocation talk had anything to do with how poorly the Raiders played this year?
Yeah, I think it could have. It did draw a lot of negative attention, I think. But I also think that more importantly, beyond the relocation, I just think that John Gruden and the coaching staff and front office just went about building this roster the wrong way. They tried to essentially they tried to basically put in some young pieces in place in certain areas that didn't exactly make sense, but also added a ton of veteran players. So it was kind of like they were almost trying to rebuild the roster, but wanted to have young talent in other spots. So it was kind of a strange situation, and it didn't make a lot of sense, especially considering the fact that they have such a solid offensive line. It was good players on it. They had a good quarterback. They had a veteran running back in Marshawn Lynch. So, they were in a good position to have a chance to win now, but instead they decided to kind of go for a mixture of rebuild and win, which now, which didn't make sense. So.
And my last question on this, and I promise we'll move on, but when you look at the Raiders and John Gruden, I always go back to the job that Jack Del Rio did while he was there. He was 12-4, then his quarterback got hurt in the playoffs, and then he had a bad year the following year. So do you think the Raiders went in the right direction by hiring Gruden and getting rid of Del Rio when the old regime in the first place?
Mark Davis made a snap decision. I mean, I don't know the exact quote, obviously, but he openly said, like, he had been recruiting John Gruden or whatever the case may be. It's basically that he was trying to get John Gruden back for some time. And, honestly, at that point, it comes down to, like, what would have happened if Jack Del Rio had made the playoffs? Or what would have happened if Jack Del Rio would have taken that team to the AFC Championship game? And then John Gruden decided he wanted to come back. Would they still have fired him at that point? I mean, that's a big question, and that would be a huge move, And, I do think that, don't get me wrong, I don't think Jack Del Rio is an elite coach or anything like that. I don't think he's a top-tier coach, but he was a coach who worked well with the players they had in that building. Like, they just meshed well. And, yeah, they had a bad season. There's no question about it. It's disappointed. The offense wasn't great. But it's also easy to forget that while Jack Del Rio may kind of have thrown a little bit of shade towards his defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator, they also hired a rookie offensive coordinator in Todd Downing during that year. And it was because Downing knew Derek Carr well and they didn't want to lose him. But that was a huge mistake. They let Bill Musgrave walk in a spot where they shouldn't have. So that was a bad decision, absolutely, whether it was from Jack Del Rio, which it probably was. That was a bad call. But granted, I don't think it all falls on Del Rio, that bad year. But on the other side of things, I don't think the great year all goes to Jack Del Rio. All the credit goes to him either. So I do think he got a bad spot there. I don't think it was exactly fair to him. But, hey, he's still getting paid, and he's been linked to some other jobs, so that's good. And he will get another job, whether it be as a defensive coordinator, possibly a head coach down the line. He's going to have opportunities. I mean, obviously, people like him, and he's respected.
When you look at incumbent head coaches, which one do you believe is on the thinnest of ice and has to perform in order to keep their job in 2019?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, there's a few names that come along with that, and you're going to find that I feel like some of them are going to be on the hot seat almost before it even, before things really kind of, before the year even begins, for almost every single one of these names. But before I get into those, the one name I do want to mention is Jason Garrett for the Cowboys. I think he's an interesting...
I thought you might say that.
Oh, yeah, really? Yeah. I mean... It's an interesting spot. What made you think that?
Oh, just because of the team he coaches. There's always news and noise around the Cowboys. And if they're not in the Super Bowl every year, it's a failure, right? So I thought you might say that.
Absolutely. No, I mean, you're spot on. That's a spot-on analysis. I mean, it really is. If they're not making a huge stride forward, then there's always issue. I mean, there's always some concern. And, you got to look at last season. Look at the playoffs last year. I mean, obviously, I know their season wasn't perfect. I know they weren't amazing, but they did well with the players they had. Their defense wasn't supposed to be as good as it was, and they won the first round of the playoffs, of course, and they lost a tough game after that. Obviously, there's some questions, but before they lost to the Rams, there was chatter about Jason Garrett getting his contract extension. So, when it goes from Jerry Jones saying we're talking about giving Jason Garrett contract extension to being like, no, never mind, he's going to play out the final year of his contract under this one season. But that's like, you're basically just saying, like, I have no faith in you. Good luck. If you can make it to the Super Bowl, then hey, we'll give you a new contract extension. Like, it's just a terrible precedent to set, and I just think it's very, very poor. I just don't like it at all. But I think it's the unfortunate spot Jason Garrett's in. And similar thing to Jack Del Rio, I don't think Jason Garrett is an incredible coach. I don't think he's like, the next Bill Belichick. I think he's fine. I think he does a fine job, and I think he's improved as a coach. There are far worse coaches out there than him, but I just think he's always going to be on the hot seat. It's just the way it's going to go, and I don't think it's going to change. It's like with right now with Ron Rivera and the Panthers. That's the other one I was going to name. Ron Rivera is he's just going to stay on the hot seat, it seems like. And there's nothing he can really do to get off of it at this point. I mean, whether or not it changes next season, maybe it will. But right now, it's a major toss-up. It's a total unknown. So I think he'd be an interesting name to watch as well.
And when we talk about players, what players are players are you most interested to see if they have a bounce back year going into next year?
Yeah, so first I'm really interested in Le'Veon Bell, of course. Regardless of where he ends up, I just want to see I want to see what he looks like on the field. I mean, obviously taking this much time off from football is not an easy task. I'm sure he stayed in great shape. I'm sure he's done all the right stuff and everything, but you got to wonder, what's he going to be like? What's he going to be like when he gets back and he gets paid? And I don't know. I'm really interested to see how that plays out. But I also want to see kind of how we see Aaron Rodgers kind of come together with LaFleur there in Green Bay. Obviously, Rodgers wasn't terrible this year or anything like that, but I really want to see how that plays out. I think that's going to be a nice topic. I think that'll be a good headline, and I don't think his career is not going to just fall apart. He'll still be a great quarterback, but the Packers haven't helped him out much either, so that's worth noting. So I think him, and then Kirk Cousins, of course, with the Vikings. Cousins' season ending with the Vikings was kind of concerning, but I want to see how he does in another season with that team and the weapons he has around him.
Do you think he's overpaid?
Kirk Cousins?
Yeah.
That's a great question. The way the quarterback contracts are structured right now is very interesting. With that said, $84 million over 3 years is a ton of money. So I do think that Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback. I don't think he's a $28 million a year quarterback, especially considering the fact that the way that contract is structured basically sets the team up to be stuck with a ton of dead cap money if they were to release him. So the team killed themselves with the contract. I know they needed a quarterback or wanted a quarterback badly, but I think he's slightly overpaid for who he is. But that's not to say I think he's a bad quarterback. I do think he's a solid quarterback, but that's a lot of money.
Do you think they should have stayed with the one they had?
With Keenum? No, I know Case Keenum is a good person. I covered him previously. Actually, I know he's a fine quarterback, but I don't think he's an NFL starting quarterback. I think the Broncos made a snap decision that was a bad decision with that signing. Also, obviously they can kind of get out of it, and it's not long term, which is fine. But I just think that at this point, the Vikings need to look to the draft, try to find their next quarterback through the draft, and then roll with Cousins for now. I think that's kind of what they have to do. I think that's a smart move to do, but that contract did put them sort of behind the eight ball, I guess, when it comes to, the rest of the roster, obviously, to some extent.
And circling back to the Panthers, we talked about them earlier. I'm just curious, since you're connected down there, your thoughts on Cam Newton's and some of the comments he had in the media, his overall play this year, or this past year, and how you think it affected the perception of him and sort of where his career is at this point.
Yeah, so Cam Newton's a tough guy to gauge, I guess. Obviously, if you're talking about the comments he made about the local beat writer, Jordan Rodriguez, I used to actually work with her. She does a great job. But yeah, I feel like he made a big mistake with those comments. That's just not something that you can say. I think that's just not acceptable. I think he probably knows it's unacceptable at this point. But I was sorry to hear that he said that for her and for everyone else in the media industry, every other woman in the media industry, every other person in the media industry. As far as a football standpoint goes, I feel like there's a lot of question around what Cam Newton can be, what he can do moving forward. That's the big thing with Cam Newton. He's 29 years old now, and everyone said throughout the early stages of his career, like, he's running too much, he's taking too many hits. Like, running too much is not the issue. It's taking too many hits that's the issue. And if he can't figure out a way to fix that, then the shoulder injuries and like the nicks and bruises that come along with this are going to make it so that he's not able to play at a very high level by the time he's 31, or whatever the case may be. And that would be a shame because he has upside. Obviously, he struggled with some accuracy in his career, but he has a tremendous upside as a player, just as a pure football player. He's a fun player to watch. And as soon as I really think that they should let his shoulder just get as close to 100% as it possibly can be, and then decide to roll from there and go with go with him at that point. But take the time, let him get back to 100%, even if that means going with Colin Kaepernick or going with another quarterback to start the year if that's the case.
And my last NFL question before we give you a couple of NBA rapid-fire questions is, what has you most intrigued about watching football this upcoming year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm really interested to see two things. The first is obviously everyone's going to talk about the Patriots. Everyone wants to know what the Patriots will be, what they'll look like, what their future is. Will Rob Gronkowski retire? Will Tom Brady take a step back? Brady obviously was great again this season. Of course, he didn't have as many weapons as he had before, so I think that impacted his numbers a little bit. I'm curious to see when the decline from Brady does come. I mean, don't get me wrong. What he's done is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But at some point in every NFL player's career, unless they just retire at the top, then they're going to hit some level of a decline. So will that come this year? Will they add, more pass catchers for him? Will Josh Gordon be back? That's a whole interesting situation. And then along with that, obviously the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, they have, Patrick Mahomes is one of the most exciting, enjoyable, fun players to watch I've ever seen play. He seems to be a humble, down-to-earth guy from what I can tell. And I'm really excited to see what they do in the future and what they put together. I'm interested to see who they bring in at running back or what they do at that position, because